Sanding. Something woodworkers generally all hate, and due to its tedious nature, content-type people tend to leave out of videos. But earlier this year, while I was prototyping guitar hangers, I needed to do a lot of it. And on curves. Small curves, big curves, in-betweeny curves. But because I don't have the space for one of these fancy spindle stroke belt sanders, I decided to make my own using tools I had to hand. This is what happened. For my materials, I'm going with some 12mm ply. I tried MDF, but A, I hate the stuff, and B, I hate the stuff, so ply it is. Some time ago, I Heath Robinsoned this bit of broom handle on a bolt to go in the drill press. It did the job, but I worried that constant lateral pressure on the drill arbour wasn't good for the machine. As I needed to do a lot of sanding for these guitar hangers, but also because it will give me the chance to explore more than just cubes in my woodworking, I decided to make myself a more permanent solution with a fixed rotation point at the bottom so I couldn't push too hard against any lateral force, and also utilise the drill press's uppy-downy technology to replicate the motion of a spindle sander. The plan is to make a base which will slide over the table of the drill press, with a raised platform attached as a workpiece support. The base plate was a board the same size as the table, with side pieces attached to stabilise it. No problem, until I noticed my rookie mistake. Not adding in the width of the sides. Honestly, sometimes my brain just forgets to engage. If it were a proper piece of furniture, I'd remake the sides. But, at the end of the day, this is a jig, so it doesn't have to look perfect. As they're only there to stop the whole thing twisting, I decided to side fix them and just put up with visible edges that don't quite reach the ground. It works for now. Also, I drilled some holes in line with the table slots to allow me to clamp it down. I'm referencing my prototype drum, which is 5 layers of 12mm ply stacked, to gauge the height of the platform. I made it a tad shorter to ensure that the tops and tails of the drums are kept out of the way of any workpieces. It's a jig, so no need for fancy joinery, but joints and screws are fine, as long as all the screws are countersunk to avoid ripping any workpieces. Eventually, the top will need a hole bigger than the biggest drum I am likely to use, but I'll come back to the drums and that hole later. For now, I need to work out how to fix the platform to the base. To give me maximum working area and allow room for the fixing knobs, the platform is set off-centre to the front. As with much of woodworking, there are several ways I could have skinned this particular cat, but here I lined up the platform, marked the outline and drilled through the baseboard just inside that outline, set the screws with the tip just peeking through so they just grip the platform when I put it back in place. I could then turn the whole shebang over and fully send the screws home. It would honestly only matter aesthetically if the platform ended up a bit on the wonk, as workpieces can be brought to the sanding drum at any position or angle. But it would have hurt my delicate sensibilities if I hadn't lined it up straight, so let me assure you every effort was made. We now come to the complicated bit, the mechanism of keeping the arbour, in this case a length of threaded rod with the end squared off to fit in the chuck, fixed horizontally but free to move along the vertical axis. After much deliberation, I hit upon the idea of passing the rod through a riser, which would move vertically along 2 upright riser bars fixed between the base and the platform, while keeping the centre point aligned to the chuck. The riser is a simple bit of ply with 2 holes drilled through to take the riser bars, some steel rod which I cut into 2 short lengths. I bought this rod ages ago for something, I can't remember what, but I'm hoping that as whatever it was hasn't happened yet, I'm probably safe to use it without the house falling down or something. Happy days. The bars will sit in mortices in the base and platform, and yes, it probably would have been easier to make a template to mark their locations, but I can never resist the opportunity to make life difficult for myself. So I opted for some distantly remembered and poorly applied high school geometry. Having made the riser, I marked a series of squares and triangles to give me accurate centre lines, then lined everything up using the drill point as a reference to mark where to drill across all the pieces. It was a bit inexact, but no calculations were harmed in the process and everything lined up perfectly. Almost. Have you spotted my mistake? Well, I only realised when I came to drill out the drum aperture, right over the rear riser bar. For some reason I'd aligned the riser front to back, but because of the offset platform the rear bar was closer to the drill point than the front one. So I made another riser, this time aligned left to right, worked out the sighting of the bars again and set them again. And after an hour or so I was back where I was. This is probably a good place to talk about the drums. There's not much to it really. Using a hole saw I cut up to 5 discs or biscuits from a scrap of 12mm ply. The hole saw leaves a 6mm central hole, which I can then pass a bolt through, glue each biscuit together, stack and tighten down with a butterfly nut. Or wing nut as we used to call them. Once the glue has dried, I can thread what will be my main arbour through the whole packet of biscuits, chuck it in the chuck and very carefully take a mortising chisel to smooth out any loose material, follow up with some sandpaper and voila, a basic sanding drum. Took some experimenting with spray glue, double-sided tape, Jubilee clips, cable ties and blind faith before I settled on a slit in the side of the drum as the quickest and easiest way of securing the paper. I'm using belt sander belts as they are stronger than standard paper. I fold them at each end to push into the slot, which works provided the paper is cut square. And where I've drilled holes along the slot on the top and bottom of the drum, I can use wee screws to hold the paper in. The arbour is secured to the riser with a locking nut underneath and double square nuts on the top. The drum is then fed down the arbour till it rests on the nuts. A washer and butterfly nut secure it, and it can be tightened in the chuck. The design may have to be altered if using a fixed head drill press, but this Bosch, which I absolutely love, has a fixed base, so I can position the head with the bottom of the drum just under the platform top and lock it into place before applying the uppy-downy technology we talked about earlier. Some final touches. A bushing in the rear riser to stop the arbour wearing down the plywood. Some toppers for the platform will allow me to close off larger holes when I'm using smaller drums. And lastly, a hole for the hose of my shop vac to suck up the worst of the sanding dust. And now for the final demo. Watch the drum. Must remember to tighten my butterfly. Now there's a sentence you never thought you'd hear. And if you want to hear more sentences like that, perhaps you consider subscribing, giving me a like or a share. Every little helps more than you know. And thanks also if you have watched this far. Hopefully it means I'm doing something right. Anyway, back to the jig. It's not the prettiest, but then jigs only really have to meet a basic need. They are also always works in progress and will get adapted over time. For example, I may add a fence and a template follower to this, so I'm not wasting good walnut covering exposed edges when I may need to expose them again. And besides, the more time I spend on the jig, the less I'm spending on the job it was designed to do. Anyway, despite its appearance, I hope you like it. What would you have done differently? I'd be really interested to hear your thoughts. Thanks for watching, and happy sanding.